I think a deeper economic insight. I keep thinking to Frederick Hayek, and this is a familiar quote I'm paraphrasing here, but he wrote in this great little book called The Fatal Conceit. He says the curious task of economics is basically to convince people how little they know about what they imagine they can design. And I see this playing out over and over again with governors, mayors, city councils, even all the way up to the president of the United States. There's a propensity to project that you are in control, that you do have the knowledge to navigate this crisis if only we enact the exact levers that we think are going to mitigate different steps of its evolution. So if we go on lockdown this week and then we tighten the lockdown next week, or then maybe before that we had implemented a social distancing policy in public places, that this is going to yield predictable, discernible results that get us to a point of disease mitigation that we'd like to be at. So it's perfectly well intentioned, but the problem here is there are vast levels of uncertainty underlying all of these decisions, to the point that when you're actually making some of these projections, the very announcement of the projection itself induces people to change their behavior, their response to it. So the result that you were anticipating in the model is in some ways already invalid before the policy itself comes into place.
Yeah, and in one of your posts, I think it was the threat of the Rhode Island governor to
Right.
shut the border with New York. The very threat of doing that induced people to do things that they might not otherwise have done, which may have in fact spread infection as opposed to containing it. Explain.
Yeah, exactly. So suppose you live in Rhode Island, or even more importantly, suppose you live somewhere in the I-95 corridor, which means you have to drive through Rhode Island to get from, say, Boston to New York or vice versa. So this is a major freeway that goes through this very small state, where the governor announced that basically she was going to put checkpoints at the different borders on 95, where you have to pull off in the rest station and register with the state police if you have an out-of-state license plate. And if you were intending to stay in Rhode Island, you'd go into quarantine even. So this is intended to be a policy to mitigate and prevent the transfer of disease from this hotbed area of New York City further up the coast. So perfectly well-intentioned, at least as they presented it. But if you think about some of the consequences of a policy like this, you announce that you're going to put an entire state under a situation of closed borders and a lockdown associated with that. What happens if you are a resident of Rhode Island, or you are a resident who has another home somewhere along that corridor that has to pass through Rhode Island? Well, maybe you would have previously been considering sheltering in place, but now you have this situation where maybe for an indefinite time in the future, or several months, you're not going to be able to travel. So what do? You throw all the bags in the back of your car and head on up the freeway before the lockdown takes place, before the border restrictions come into place. And we see this over and over again with states that have announced this policy. So Florida is another one where the governor has said they want to restrict travel from people that are coming from states in the Northeast that are seeking refuge from this epidemic. Well, quite a few people in the Northeast have second homes or vacation homes down in Florida. So you make an announcement that, hey, Florida is going to be cut off to anyone from New York City for the indefinite future, and you're living in New York City, and maybe you were going to ride it out up there. Now, all of a sudden, it becomes a decision. Do I hop in my car and try to get to Florida, which is less affected, less restricted at the moment than New York, to beat this lockdown? And in the process, you end up moving more people around than would have been the case otherwise. And with them, at least some of them are going to be carrying this virus.